1913 Land Act defined the present day South Africa. It represents all its challenges. It represents many of the difficulties that you see today. It was a precursor to a whole raft of laws that ultimately were meant to have South Africa as a divided country across race and class. So fundamentally, the 1913 Land Act is the act that defined how we behave in many ways in the present day South Africa. Historically, it is that important.
South Africa in the earliest years, and we're talking sort of hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, but people who used the land moved around according to the seasons, according to the grazing, etc. So the land was to an extent open, it was communal land.
We were there already as Khoi people and Bushman people. And Mother Earth belonged to all of us.
Obviously things changed over time. Iron Age farmers came in, started growing crops, and the minute you grow crops, you demarcate a portion of land. So you had a group of people coming in, settling, growing crops, claiming the land, using the land for subsistence. And you had other people moving at the same time, the hunter-gatherers in the landscape.
These people were not registered landowners in terms of how we define it under common law, where we talk about ownership. They occupied the land, not under title.
But both had something in common, and that was the notion of land that was communal. Land did not belong to any person. What happened then is we had the advent of the settlers from Europe coming in. So you had the Dutch people coming in, followed by the English and a whole lot of other colonial people. And there you brought a different kind of view of land into play, and that is the land as individual ownership.
The white people came and they started farming with them. They'll say, okay, well, let's farm together.
So you get two systems of land occupation sitting side by side.
The next thing, then the white farmer says, no, actually your herd of cattle is contaminating my cattle, whether there's some disease that's outbreak, and then suddenly there's a fence.
When Jan van Riebeeck started to build a fence around the Liesbeek River, that was the first form of discrimination in the country.
And then it moves from a fence to you need to move out.
And so they were driven out of this particular land.
And literally that's how it happened.
South Africa, as we know today, had only existed for 3 years when the Land Act came into place.
That law actually now validated all of this that was done, where black people suddenly found themselves being pushed into a small corner in an environment where they should have had the opportunity to occupy their own land.
It took land away formally from people, and it gave land formally the right to occupy land to other people.
Those white farmers were able to use the law that said, you're not allowed to be in this space. I've got the power, you get out now.
Without that building block in place, it wouldn't have been possible to put in place apartheid. In the 19th century, what happened is the colonial governments and the Boer republics started imposing a set of taxes. If you don't have land, you can't sustain yourselves. If you have to pay taxes, you have to get a job. If you have to get a job, you have to go and work somewhere. If your family can't go with you, your family is disrupted. If you're taken out of a community, your community is disrupted. Land, power, labor, the ties between those are irrevocable. If you look at the history of legislation, you'll see 1913 Land Act set in place those segregated areas. 1923 dealt more strictly with the rural areas. 1936 was the extension of the Land Act, different kind of provisions, entrenched segregation very deeply.
I was born in a former black spot myself, an area that was meant for white people. That's why they were called black spots. So I was supposed to move to a township.
You began to see other legislation that then began to affirm and suppress the black people.
With the upheavals at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a whole sort of growth of Afrikaans nationalism, and when the Nats came to power in 1948, things shifted radically. 1950, Group Areas Act, a seminal date in our history, because that said, if you're black, you live here. If you're white, you live here. If you're black, in fact, you may or may not own property in this area. That didn't just take land away from people, it took their very citizenship away. So suddenly, because you were black, because you spoke a particular language, you were classified as being a citizen of another place altogether. So if you spoke Venda, you had to go and live in Venda. You were told, we have a quote on the exhibition where someone says, you know, suddenly I had to go to a place I'd never been to before. I was born in Johannesburg. You know, I didn't come from this place. Why do I have to go to that place?
There was very, very deep damage that was done in the country, physically, in terms of space, how we live today, how we commute between our homes to our places of work.
In the 80s, we have the era of sort of mass mobilization, and we have resistance taking on a different stance completely. You have those huge protests, you have external pressure, international community putting pressure on government, you have the armed struggle, you have really high intensity resistance, and of course government started to crumble. So in the sort of mid to late 80s, some of these acts start to be repealed. And so what is being unpicked, though, is the legislative framework. And you know, you could make an act which affects people's lives. You can repeal an act and that affects people's lives. But just repealing the act doesn't change the situation. All our cities carry that legacy. It's a scar on our landscape. It's something that will probably take us, you know, generations to overcome.
The present day South Africa signifies progress that has been made in 20 years, following that 100 years of history. But if you are young, there is very little, if anything, we are going to be able to associate that history with the present day South Africa.
How do we make this relate to younger people who've probably never had the experience of going through this apartheid area?
If you are 20 years old, if you are 30 years old, you may not be able to completely relate with that particular history.
There are very few people who will read history books. There are very few people who will study texts.
How do you make this emotionally connect with people? Because if you read something, you remember so much. If you see something, you remember so much. But if you experience it, if you're part of it, you remember a lot more.
The department did very well to think about how best we could then take it to people. And they started designing this exhibition for it to tell the story historically, to also reflect the materiality of that history.
We've worked very well with the department to date. You know, as a group, we've actually gelled well. ZF Fans On and the Department of Land Reform. We're an events company that specializes in the sort of creative and the exciting, having done many projects where creative work was on showcase.
How do we make this different or interesting? My thought process was, instead of building exhibition sets, why don't we build film sets?
So the person coming to the exhibition is actually transported into these sets, into time, as it were, where they can experience what it was like to have been in that era.
It's been a very rushed project in the 4 weeks only to do it. We've drawn plans, we've redrawn plans, but to actually put those in place and to actually walk around has been, I didn't think I was going to be quite as moved as I was. As I say, we've done the sounds, we've done the actors, we've looked at the projections, we've looked at all the TV productions, AV stuff, everything. But the way it's come together has been far more emotional than I thought. I thought it would be more sort of a dry history lesson. But to walk around there and with the actors enjoying themselves in one section and another section, going to how rough things actually were. I'm not a tearful person, but I was really moved, and I had tears in my eyes more than once.
Actually, I've been through it now probably 3 or 4 times, because I walk around and actually look at the people. People are standing there crying because it's still an open wound to a lot of people.
I still don't look at the side of people who were removed sitting on the side of the road. I don't look at that, because this thing is too painful. Because these people sit there like, you see, I wasn't prepared. For the first time I went there, I wasn't prepared for that. And then I saw this man, this tall man, you know, with a suitcase in his hand. He says, "Have you seen my family?" I wasn't prepared for that. And I looked at this and I thought, what's happening here? And as I was looking at him, I see this couple who was sitting there, the wife is crying tears, and I thought, no, I can't look at this. I walked past it. It was too painful.
Examples of those pieces that I think have an unusual capacity to move people are the tunnel of pickaxes relating to mining. There's an intersection of fences, division, borders, control, restriction approaching that point, and then this tunnel built of labor, the way forward built of people's human work, and their tools were used to make that.
You got sort of a kraal on the one side, and so you get to feel what that was like, and then you get confronted with this huge monolith 1913 Land Act, and you know, you've got to sort of arch your neck to see the scope and the size of it. And then there's you know, legislation world just behind us with all these plinths of each, the Native Land Act, and then the Group Areas Act, and then the Bantustans, and then all this sort of oppressive law that affected everybody. We must be clear about this. You know, this is stuff that affected everybody. So we looked for a way of involving artists, involving creative people, involving actors, poets. We've got a storytelling booth, and the general idea is to really make you relive parts of that, but in a safe environment, because we mustn't forget that it was traumatic for many people.
We are so happy to be here at the celebration of the 100 years of the Native Land Act, just to reflect on the gravity of this whole act and how it has impacted on us as a family. And it is so emotional that I'm struggling to find calmness as I try to explain to you how we have suffered.
Where they stamp your pass, the guys who actually do it they're hardcore. They aren't jokey actors. They look you straight in the eye. If you laugh at them, they stand with their feet apart and they don't move. and they don't laugh back. They look you very straight in the eye. So the reactions that they're getting out of people, it's reality. Because people think, I'm going into exhibition, it's going to be a bit of fun here, and here this guy's trying to pull my leg and stuff, and he's actually not. And I think it's Sean, who's in charge of all the actors, will tell you that some of these actors are actually feeling quite traumatized about it themselves. It's not an easy thing to do. And at the end of the day, they get about it, and they get together and they talk about their experiences for the day and try and sort of drain their emotions a bit, because it's a hard day in there for them too.
Even the president, when he had his stamp, and the minister, when they'd got the passbooks in their hands, they looked at each other, and the minister said to President, I remember doing this, and they both smiled, you know, and it brought back, and it was nice to see. It was just, you know, and that's when you realise, starting from Khoisan and the colonial era, and where we are today, how far we have come since 1994. It is, in 20 years, amazing that we reversed, and that's what it's all about, really. Reversed what has happened for over 100 years.
Well, it's incredible also because, as I say, it's not a normal exhibition. It's quite revolutionary. It's quite on the line and on the edge. So in that sense, the fact that the important people have enjoyed it. So when people accept it, when we have taken a chance, there's no doubt we've taken a chance. If people do accept it, for us, it's very gratifying.
I think some of the stuff that's most inspiring to me, and I think to many people who go through the exhibition, is that there's an artistic sense to so much of it. And why that's interesting and important is because it gives people an emotional response, an emotional experience that they might otherwise not get from information only.
Some people have walked out. People have turned, they've been stopped by the colonial police, and they've turned around, they've walked out in a huff. As I said, there will be letters to the newspaper written, but that exhibition is going to move you. There's no doubt about that. So for me, having been involved in it from inception, I'm extremely moved by it. And every time I go in there, as I say, I get emotional about it. And I know this will last a long time.
When I walked through there, I actually remembered my dad. And us being young, driving to Newcastle, and we stopped in Pietermaritzburg, and we needed a loo. And we walked around, and all the loos said, whites only. Couldn't get in. I ended up having to wee next to the car because couldn't get in, whites only. So you think about those things, and my mom comes from Alexander, and they were moved. And so when I walked through that and I saw that truck, that Bedford truck, that just got to me. And it made it real. That, no, these are people's lives here that I'm dealing with as the Chief Land Claims Commissioner. That it's not just a job that I'm doing. And in fact, I actually do tell my staff that, guys, this is about us reversing the legacy.
We lace every vowel with a click, so when we speak, the bowels of the earth may relate and reverberate in thunder. Under the rule of divine inspiration, we find inclinations to break out in song, so long as the djembe beat goes.
We had about 79,000 claims lodged prior to the cutoff date of 1998. And basically anybody who had lost a right in land after 1913 had a right to claim. We've managed to settle about 77,000 of those.
The Commission tries to settle the claims through a process of negotiation and mediation. The difficult claims that cannot be settled are referred to the court, so we deal with the really complex claims. What the court does is adjudicate claims that have been lodged by persons for restitution of rights in land. And these are claims that are lodged by individuals, by communities, or by descendants of persons who were dispossessed. And in order to successfully prosecute a claim, there's certain key requirements. Firstly, you must have been dispossessed of a right in land after 1913 as a result of a racial law or racial practice, and at the time of dispossession, you did not get just and equitable compensation.
So I think that what's important in the process that's unfolded until now is for people to actually understand that we don't go to the current owners of the land and actually grab the land. We actually negotiate and we then buy the land. That's what this is. And if we could move from that premise, so when we go to negotiate with the current farm owner about their farm, that it's not about, I'm defending my territory, I've got a title deed, who are you, where do you come from? It's about, wait a minute, is there a possibility that in fact there's a history here that we can consider? And after all, the government is saying that let's pay you fair, reasonable compensation for your land. We're not saying we're wanting to take it, we're just going to pay you fair, reasonable compensation. This is a human story, you know what I mean? It's a human story. It's not about semantics, it's not about numbers, it's not about the size of whose farm, it's not about the fact that I've got a title deed now. It's not about that. It's about the fact that there were people whose rights, whose human dignity was taken away at a certain point in time. That's what restitution is about. It's about us acknowledging the fact that, hey, wait a minute, actually I stepped on your toe. It's about serving the people of South Africa the best way that I can. And for as long as I'm able to do this, I will do it. Because being able to see an old gogo from deep rural area crying because the land that was taken away years ago suddenly comes back, and they never thought that in their lifetime that would happen.
For me, it is very rewarding to be able to continue that in my work as a judge of the court.
I'm also standing here as a person, as a father, as a brother, as a family man that want to see for my descendants and for my children's children to actually live and be restored to their ancestral land.
What we are doing is contributing to changing the country for the better. So it is fulfilling in many ways. It is challenging, but it is exciting too.
And I've just walked through the exhibition with a friend, and he said, this has changed my mind about a lot of things. And if that happens to just one person alone, that's worth it.
I don't think anybody can walk that exhibition and not feel something.
And what was more humbling was realizing how ignorant I had been of the relation and the intensity of so much of that. I'm less ignorant now, and that's been transformative.
You see, that's what people commit to. They commit to understanding that the past wasn't that good, but that the future can be that bad.
I think we need to have learned a lesson from that. We need to say we have to heal. We have to have people feeling that their hurts and their wounds have actually been dealt with appropriately. There will always be people who are dissatisfied. That's human nature. But I think you have to keep trying.